Are you driving a car with tires that have indents in the sidewalls? Treads that are worn right through to the base? Bumps and humps and uneven wear? Chunks missing from the bottom? Or perhaps even a bulge in the sidewall of your tires right here? Well, the truth is you may in fact be driving around on a vehicle with tires that are truly unsafe. Some of these conditions are normal, some of these conditions aren't. I'm gonna break this down to the different types of failures you're gonna find on some of your tires. Because ultimately, like they say, this is the only thing that becomes between you and the road. And if you're driving 60, 70 miles an hour, the last thing you wanna have is a catastrophic failure. Because best case scenario, it could be nothing. It might be a minor change on the amount of air pressure you put into your tire. And on the worst case scenario, it could mean an absolute catastrophic blowout. So I'm gonna break these down as to some of the major failures you could actually find, what these different conditions and symptoms actually mean, and how you should actually rectify the problem. Let's get into it now.
Life's too short to drive boring cars.
So one of the first things you probably notice on some tires, especially in vehicles, you'll notice it more so on higher sidewalls like this that have a lot more rubber this way vertically. And typically you'll see it on a lot of tires that aren't such low profile. Tires are generally more service duty for highway use and maybe not so much for off-roading, more general highway service factor you'd find on a light duty truck, a light car, maybe a minivan. And many of these vehicles will run a very soft sidewall on the tires. And a lot of the reason for that is compliance. You want to make sure these manufacturers put tires under these vehicles that give a cushy ride, relaxed ride. They're not meant for very sporty type of driving, but they are in fact meant for a soft ride that's relaxing and compliant. As well, a very spongy tire tends to be easier on the rest of the suspension, bushings, ball joints, shocks, struts, you name it. So having a high sidewall gives a better ride, smoother on the vehicle and smoother on the drivers and the riders. So a lot of times that's why you're finding this. But a lot of times as well, if you happen to notice, you'll see an indent that usually runs across the height. You can see it anywhere on that tire. You might see it in one spot or so. You might only see it on one tire. You might see it on two tires. You might see it on none. But if you happen to see that it's an indent, it sort of goes in, concave, it sort of goes inwards and it looks like a fault or a flaw in the tire. Well, contrary to popular belief, a lot of people believe that can lead to a catastrophic failure. Now, the fortunate part is most of those, when they're uniform and they run from top to bottom and it's just an indent that runs all the way and it's consistent, usually that's fairly normal. Generally speaking, that's just in the manufacturing. The cords and maybe some of the overlap or lack thereof within the cords didn't quite overlap, or they overlap too much, and then you create this bulging situation. And the way they're wrapped generally means you'll see it in that vertical position. That's pretty normal. And 99.9% of the time, to see that indentation that runs that way is actually extremely normal and not really worrisome at all. So it's not something to panic about. You might see it on one tire, you might see it on another. Some days when the tire's hotter, maybe you put more air in. Drive it for a while, sometimes cords, it moves around a little bit, and sometimes you thought you saw it and then you come back 2 weeks later and you can't really find it and you're looking around and it's very faded. So sometimes it sort of moves around and settles in. But generally, that line that you'll find an indentation is not something to be seriously worried about. Now on some tires, you'll notice right here we have a bulge. And it's like a hernia. If anybody's ever had a hernia before, lift too much weight, all of a sudden you have a little bulge in your abdomen area. It's very much the same idea. It's a result of stress, and it's a weakness in the sidewall, and that's not good. It's because instead of being an indent that goes in, this is bulging out. Now this could be a combination of going too fast, usually uninflated or underinflated, or it's just too much load on the tire for a period of time, or it's just aged, and sometimes it just happens. It's old, worn out tires. That can be a major problem right here, or it could be a result of separation. Separation of a tire often happens where the tread and the sidewall, sometimes there's a bit of a separation, and that can increase the height of the tire, as well as you can also get these bulges in the tire. The sidewall, this can be a serious, serious problem and a serious detriment to personal safety. When you start to see bulges like this and they start to bulge out more and more, that's a sign. Get that fixed ASAP. That's something you don't want to have lingering around too long. That is a potential catastrophic failure waiting to happen. And then, of course, if you're changing one tire, chances are the other tire on the other side is going to be very similar, and you might as well do them at least in pairs, Or if you have four-wheel drive car, then you've got to do all four. Sometimes your tire, maybe you hit a curb, maybe you rounded a corner too fast, and sometimes you'll wind up with damage. It's not uncommon to wind up with damage on your rim. You know, you hit some concrete, round a corner, and it might damage or scuff up your wheel. But in doing so, it might also damage the tire. Give a close look to your tire all the way around. This one has a bit of what they call a rim protector. It actually has a bit of a lip here. And this lip here is designed to actually protect the actual aluminum wheel in the event of actually hitting a curb. But that said, it always does a little bit more of a sacrificial of its own. And unfortunately, the tire usually takes the worst of the brunt when you have these rim protectors built on these tires. Now, this here is a chunk and it's missing out of the sidewall. That's never a good scene. Now, I don't see anything. I don't see any cords in there. And ultimately, worst case scenario, I'm going to say CYA again. If you're not sure and it goes pretty deep, you may want to take it to a tire shop and get them to look at it. Because if you take a big enough chunk, you could actually compromise the integrity of the sidewall, which really is what holds the weight of the vehicle up. So you could compromise the strength of the tire on the sidewall, but also it could just cause a slight unbalance. If you take too much rubber, maybe you tear a big chunk off, that could actually create an unbalance in the wheel, and all of a sudden you get a bit of a shake and shimmy. So anytime you get a weird drivability concern, doesn't matter whether it's a chunk missing like this, doesn't matter whether it's just driving and it looks relatively normal, when all of a sudden you've developed a shake in your steering wheel or an overall shake and the whole chassis is shaking, there's often something going on. And I would always recommend checking it out because it could be tire related. It could even be suspension. It could be shocks, struts. It could be some other unbalance. Maybe the rim needs to be balanced. Maybe there's the little weights they put on there. One fell off and now you've got a bit of an unbalance. You could have a misalignment of the suspension. The one thing that is a strong possibility are tires. If the tires are either separating, sometimes it creates an elevated height and all of a sudden you get a really good jump. And I've experienced that myself personally. So if you get a shake or a shimmy, that's always cause for alarm and always take it into a shop to have it inspected. If it's not painfully obvious, you always want to have it looked at. But a chunk in the sidewall usually is an indication. I would strongly suggest you get this whole tire replaced. And again, as always, if you're replacing one on a two-wheel drive vehicle, you always match up the pairs. And on a four-wheel or all-wheel drive vehicle, unfortunately, you've got to replace all four. Typically, if you're less than about 60 to 70% wear left on your tires, you're probably going to have to do a full set. The same thing goes if you get a nail in your tire or a screw in your tire, and you say your tires are, say, about 50% worn, the tire shop's likely going to say, we can't repair it, especially with run flats. Most shops won't do it, not safely. And also what you're going to have is basically that unbalance. If you have too much wear on a pair of tires or certain tires and you put a new tire on, now you have an unbalance. And some of that larger rolling diameter like this is different from one wheel to the other three if you're only changing one. And that can now create other problems. Transfer that torque across the differentials, the transmission. You can now create mechanical problems in the vehicle and create excess wear. So always change them in pairs or change them in fours if it's all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive. But when I look at this damage on the sidewall, I always strongly suggest at least having it inspected and at best case, even just replace it altogether. I wouldn't drive very long with that on there like that. If you need to get home and the tire's holding air, that's one thing. But I would always get this tire replaced as quick as possible. If you're liking the video so far, you're gonna love the rest of the channel. Be sure to hit that subscribe button down below and don't forget the notifications bell so you know when the next amazing videos come. Another example of tires that are not in particularly good shape. I mean, look at this tire here. As you can see, you've got a little more wear available in the middle, but you've got less wear on the edges, particularly on the outside. This means likely this is the inside edge of the tire. That means you probably had a lot of camber going on the vehicle. In other words, it didn't get a chance to rotate and the vehicle typically sat with the inside edge here more against the asphalt or the concrete. So you're seeing excess wear here. It didn't wear all that evenly, but a lot of that could be with a lot of European brands. Typically they adjust camber and you get a little bit more wear on the inside edges like this. You can also feel little humps and bumps along the way. That means you're way too far gone. That means this tire is pretty much toast. You don't see any more lines. This tire is garbage, and you should never drive on tires that look like this. Now, clearly anything that has even the outside, you say, well, look, from the outside of the vehicle, you might see these intersections here that they look fine yet. You see the lines and you put a do the old dime trick and think, okay, there's enough wear in there. But you actually have to inspect the tire right across the surface, because this inside edge now is compromised. It's almost through to the cords, not quite, but this here is clearly a tire that needs replacing. And driving it on this condition is surefire way to have a catastrophic failure in very short order. So never drive on a tire that is this bald that's ready for replacement. This is something that needs changing almost ASAP. And then just like the top one, this is a more exaggerated version. We have on this tire, obviously also a vehicle that had a very aggressive camber. This one actually wore right through to the cords. Very, very serious condition. Never drive on a vehicle like this. I wouldn't even necessarily drive it 2 blocks like this, because it could potentially fail. If your vehicle looks like this, it may not look bad from the outsides. You might actually see some of these lines. You might actually see that. So you have to inspect to the backside. But when you do and you find these kind of problems, it's definitely surefire. You better get that on the back of a tow truck. Get that to a tire shop as soon as physically possible, because this is on the verge of a catastrophic failure. You have nothing more than basically the cords left over here, very serious, and a slightly exaggerated version of the tire we just looked. And this is a situation you definitely want to have rectified ASAP. Again, remember, with these types of tires, you probably have a lot of these Euro vehicles. A lot of these vehicles actually now have what they call a staggered setup. Staggered means that the fronts and the backs, you are not able to swap them out. And so unfortunately, that means there's no tire rotation. That means if you wear this out on the back or on the front, you have to throw them in the garbage. And again, if you're doing that, you're going to do them in pairs. If you're doing them in pairs on a 2-wheel drive vehicle, you're cool. If you need to do a 4-wheel drive or an all-wheel drive vehicle, you've got to do all 4 tires. Again, if you're exceeding that wear of 70 or 80%, then you need to actually look at swapping out the entire set. So it gets to be very, very expensive, but remember, the tires are the only thing that keeps you between the rubber and the road. So remember, having a good quality set of tires is very, very important. And without getting into the guilt trip, you need to understand this is what's keeping you and your family safe. And I would highly suggest that you always inspect your tires regularly. Make sure they're always aired up to the appropriate tire pressure, which you'll typically find in the door jamb of the driver door. Always make sure they're at the right pressure, that you've got the right matching tires, and that they're not either underinflated, overinflated, and that they're not worn out. Always do those inspections for bulges and gaps and cracks and chips and chunks, and then you should be good to go.